Welcome! Today I'm going to be showing you how I installed this purely electronic access control system, which allows me to forego the use of traditional keys in exchange for passcodes, RFID tags, and my favorite, the very convenient fingerprint reader. So let's talk a little bit about wiring. There are three ways to utilize this access control panel. The first one is with the standard 12-volt power supply. The second is a special power supply because they actually make power supplies designed specifically for use in magnetic security systems. And lastly, you can actually just use it as a reader. So if you want to just output the data read from RFID tags and thumbprints and etc. to a separate system, you can do that. In this case, we will be using it in the first manner, which is just with a 12-volt power supply. So you can see they list several things. We're not using any of the data control stuff. We have our exit button, a door contact, the common, which means, well, basically that has to do with switching, but we have our common, ground, an alarm, our normally closed, as in when the system is in its normal state, common will be connected to normally closed, and that means that our magnetic lock will be powered up normally, as in locked. And lastly, we have our 12 volts and our normally open. Normally open doesn't really get used because there's no way to use it with the magnetic lock. That's for different special stuff. In this case, the door contact and alarm function are optional, so I will not be using those. So that eliminates two of these connections. Now this is actually how I'm going to be wiring up my system. It's relatively simple, although once it's in the walls it's going to look complicated. But basically, we have a 12-volt power supply that powers the entire system. We have our access control panel. We have 2 maglocks and 3 switches. So in this case, we have a secondary maglock. Because the shed has 2 doors, I'm only ever really going to be using one, but I want to have the option of utilizing the second one. So I have a second maglock for that door, but I don't want both doors opening when I go in normally. So that's just going to be hooked up directly to the power supply through a single wall switch. So once it's unlocked, I can open up the door from the inside with the wall switch. Our primary maglock is a little bit more complicated. So that's also hooked up to 12 volts all the time, but it's through a keyed switch. So there's actually a hidden switch on the outside of the building, so if for whatever reason something goes wrong here, I have a second method of opening the building. Now that flows through the maglock, and our ground actually goes to our switches normally closed. Now basically we're using 2 connections. So this entire access control panel operates what is essentially more or less a relay. So we have our common and we have our normally closed. So when it's in its lock state, these are connected together. The maglock can flow through our normally closed into our common and into ground. So that's how the maglock is wired up. Now, the access control panel also needs an exit signal, so when you're inside the building you can just exit regardless of your credentials. So in this case we have an exit signal which goes to a button, and when you press the button that signal gets pulled down to ground and the panel will open the door. Lastly, of course, we have our 12 volts and our ground running into the panel, and our common is connected to the ground. So this is the entire wiring of the system. We have our secondary maglock, which is only open when you use the switch from inside. And we have our primary access control system, which will keep the door locked unless we press the button to exit from the inside, or unless we input the proper credentials. I guess I want to talk retrospectively about all the wiring I did here. You're going to see a common theme in that I like to use these push connectors here. I think they're actually pretty neat because all you have to do is strip the wire and you push it in and you get it right every time. They're a little expensive, but they do a good job. And they're not a replacement for traditional wire nuts, but in an application like this, they make perfect sense. Now, I made all my splicing and connections in here, and then I have my 4 connections that have to go to the access control panel. And what I used is this screw terminal block. So the problem, one of my only gripes with this unit is the size of the wires. They're actually really small and delicate. So this was really the only way I could think to connect them together, aside from permanently soldering them. So I just jammed them in this screw terminal block. I have all my extra wires here, and yeah. In the same way that there's a key lock outside, there's just a latching mechanical button on the inside, as well as our standard exit button. They also have the capability for like ring LEDs. I don't have those hooked up for them at the moment, but I think I might do that later. That's all connected up with the same wire push-fit connectors. Also in this panel, I just have the single switch that controls my second magnetic lock over there. So I'll button it up and we'll make sure it works. So the mounting setup is kind of interesting. They actually gave this plate manufactured here, and you can actually see, quite unusually, it's actually being machined, which is kind of bizarre. But anyways, I unhook the unit here, and I have to push all the wire back into the box here because it has to be flush. Anyways, with almost all the wire back in the box, how it mounts is first you clip it in on the top here, and then you push it up, and then you slide it in, and it'll slide in on the bottom, and it is retained with a security Torx screw. Now, in the factory hardware, I should mention what they provide. They actually do provide the tool for this, and among other things, they of course provide lots of RFID tags. So now everything's buttoned up, so I'll turn the power back on. I actually have my 12-volt power supply located inside this panel, so flip the breakers here. And first things first, we'll test our door. So I got these mag locks here. At the top here, this giant magnet. And that is rock solid, not going anywhere. And I flip it off, and of course the door opens. These magnets are some of the most powerful magnets you can get for security purposes. These particular magnets consume nearly 10 watts apiece and actually do 180 kilograms of holding force, which is around 380 pounds. Electromagnets are really quite fantastic because you can get them in any size and any power consumption. Anything from something to hold your door shut or your drawer shut to something to hold these big doors closed. As for mounting, I kind of had to go with the top of the door frame. The ideal location is in the middle because nobody can really pry on it then. Just the problem with that is I don't have a middle door frame. Luckily the doors are very thick and stiff, so that's not so much of a problem. Mounting these was actually fairly simple. I had to drill a hole through the stud to fish up the power cables, and there's a separate bracket here, and the bracket actually gets screwed on with several wood screws, and then there's two holes in the bottom of this electromagnet, and they give you an Allen wrench which you stick up in there and you bolt it on with 2 bolts. So it appears we have power, and if I push the door shut, there, click, and I can't open the door anymore. With everything now set up and working, it's time for us to begin in the fun of programming. So they provide a manual. It's actually quite concise. So first things first, we go into our device management. So to enter the menu, we have to enter our default admin code. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 6 nines in a row. It flashes green, and that indicates that our action was successful, and now it's flashing red, which means we're in the menu. So the first thing I'm going to change is our admin code. So that's option 00. So now it's glowing orange, and that will tell me that I'm in a menu option. So to change the code, I enter my new desired code, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Enter that once, and then once more to confirm. It hits green, so that now we know it worked successfully. So try our new code, and it works, and now we're in the menu. So we know we just changed our code. Now let's set our public unlocking code. So whatever, 09. I'll set that to be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You only have to enter that once. That's good. So if we enter that code, the door actually unlocks. So works good. And the door's locked again. Now let's start changing some other options. So the way we can access the door, currently it's set to 4 by default, which is entry by card, fingerprint, or code. That's what we want. Next up, we look at our door opening time. Default value of 5. So as an example, I'm going to change that to 6. So we'll get back into our menu, and we'll go to option 41. 6 seconds. Now our alarm is disabled by default. Yes, time of keypad backlight. So I want it to glow for the same amount of time as the door is open. So that's 6 seconds from when I press a button. Probably can't see it in the daylight, but the keypad does indeed have backlight. Now let's get down to the fun stuff. So we have our options for actual credentials. So in this case, we can add users and have their credentials tied together. So as an example, if I had, say, 3 users who needed to access this building, I could give them individual user IDs. I could give them each of those users their own passcode, and then I could give each user a key card and a fingerprint tied to their user account. But because I'm the only one using this at the moment, I will do this top option, which just adds or essentially creates individual users for each fingerprint or card. So to do that, do the basic option, we hit 11. So now it's glowing orange, so that means we can now add fingerprints and card users. So I'll start with my RFID card. I tap it, it goes green, which means it just programmed the card. Now let's do the fingerprint scanner. Okay, might take a couple tries, but it just went green. So first thing we're gonna try is the card we just programmed. Goes green, the door unlocks, and it stays open for 6 seconds. And now it went back to locked. Now let's try our thumbprint. Same deal, door unlocks, stays open for 6 seconds. So obviously there's a lot of fancy things you can do with this, but you can also just have a simple thumbprint reader to open your door. Basic setup. So the main topic of today's video actually pertains to convenience. That is the #1 reason why I installed this system over a more traditional system. But I feel I should mention something about security, since that's kind of an important second factor. With traditional door locks, there are many ways to attack them with various devices and tools for opening the door. However, with this electronic system, I actually think it's a little bit simpler. I can really only see 3 ways to attack a system like this. #1 being, of course, power. Because the doors are hooked up with electromagnetic locks, when they lose power, they will unlock, unlike say a solenoid operated lock, which means that if somebody were to cut power to this building in its current state, that these doors would become unlocked. I am actually working on a backup power supply, which will provide power to this along with several other key systems in this building in the case that power goes out for whatever reason. So that's not going to be a security hole forever, but for the time being, that is something to consider. Number two is a little bit more complicated, so I'm not too concerned about it. RFID tags. So you don't have to use RFID tags on this system, but I do. And RFID tags can be read from, I believe, about 18 inches away with the proper equipment. Now, of course, nobody's going to be following me around in public and sniping my tag or whatever, just because this isn't very desirable to get into. But if you are operating in a higher security environment, that would be something you'd have to think about. The third option pertains to physical entry. So of course we have this unit installed on the wall, and as you saw earlier, it's actually held in via a Torx screw, security Torx, meaning that if somebody gets the tool to operate this, they can pull it off the wall and gain access to the wiring, which would allow them to unlock the door. So I would say the system is reasonably secure. I wouldn't put it on like something that I slept in, like for instance a house. However, for detached buildings, I think it's a great compromise between a high level of convenience and security. I suppose that brings us to the end of this video. If you enjoyed this content, I would implore you to, of course, like and subscribe, and possibly check out some of my other content. If you have any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments and I will do my best to respond. And of course, as formalities go, thanks for watching. See you next time.